helpful. Oh, that was Forrest. He's trying to figure out where the dogs are that are barking. He's not that smart. Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Yeah. So I'm kind of thinking that since mornings are a little tricky for us, we're going to try maybe this late afternoon, which might work better. Just finished shoveling. Let's see. I can shovel what we have with a teaspoon. Although, man, is it cold and windy. You're out walking in the cold wind. Blah. Yeah, we're just about to go out and feed all the animals in the barn, and yeah, and it didn't hit northern New Jersey. My sister's in Massachusetts, and she did not get the snow, but vet friend in Cape May, New Jersey, has over a foot of snow, and still coming down. So, yeah, glad to know. I never want to shovel snow again for as long as I live, so happy not to be there. Sorry, Jersey folks, some of you are enjoying it. I'm not one of those people, so Hugh and I are very happy to sit around the fireplace down here, and the sunshine is out now, and it's going to be cold, but anyway. The Veterinary Botanical Medical Association group has a very active email group. And people post really cool articles when they find them, and we talk about different herbs and how to treat cases, and it's really kind of fun. Oh, your dog just came down with vestibular disease. Well, go back and watch the video from the other day. This article that someone posted a link to today came out on December 22nd, and it was posted in a magazine called Microbiology, of all things. High of 13 today. Blah. Okay. And the title of it is Some Gut Bacteria Produce Toxic Chemicals That Can Damage the Brain. And this is a human article. And then I did a little research afterwards looking at similar studies in dogs, and they definitely exist. So I wanted to read some excerpts from this and just talk about it a little bit. So gut bacteria, we're all pretty aware at this point, perform essential functions. We know that. That's why we take probiotics. That's why we don't like to take antibiotics. We like to keep our little gut bacteria really, really, really healthy. So they help us digest certain foods, absorb nutrients. They actually produce some of the nutrients and vitamins that we need. Every one of those little microbes carries their own little genome, so their own little RNA, DNA, So scientists have now found that some of, they produce molecules and metabolites that can have an impact on the biology of the body. And scientists have now found that some of those molecules could be causing neurodegeneration, or basically degeneration of nerve cells in the brain or in the spinal tract. So 3 toxic metabolites that were produced by bacteria were identified in samples of plasma, so blood, and cerebrospinal fluid, that's the fluid surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, that were volunteered by patients with multiple sclerosis. So this is a really interesting way to study this, because these are people with a neurodegenerative disease. The work was reported in a magazine called Brain, and it may help scientists learn more about multiple sclerosis, which is not very well understood. I have a cousin who suffers with it. It's a pretty nasty degenerative disease. So previous studies have suggested that dysbiosis, or imbalances in the gut microbiome, are related to the pathology of neurological disorders, including MS. And this research confirmed that certain types of gut bacteria are more or less prevalent in multiple sclerosis patients compared to healthy people. Probably the closest thing we can look at in dogs to MS would be degenerative myelopathy. And it's also been shown how the microbes may exert their effect. Our findings suggest that MS patients' gut bacteria produce and release large amounts of 3 chemicals, which are complicated, but it's P-cresol sulfate, indoxyl sulfate, and phenylacetylglutamine into the bloodstream. And they eventually reach the cerebral spinal fluid. And interestingly, one of the studies that I found on dogs mentioned the same metabolites from the bacteria. Once into the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid surrounding the brain and spinal cord, these toxic metabolites bathe the brain and the spinal cord and potentially play a role in the destruction of the myelin sheath, which is the fatty covering that protects nerves. And so what we see in MS and DM is that myelin sheath is basically disintegrating. It dissolves and disappears, and so the nerves aren't protected anymore and they can't conduct nerve impulses. Myelin is the fatty covering is critical to health. Not only does it shield nerves, it insulates electrical activity in neurons and helps signal travel faster through the nervous system. Myelin loss has been linked to cognitive decline and other neurological dysfunction. So this would also play into Alzheimer's disease or cognitive dysfunction syndrome that we see in our senior pets. So patients provided samples of both cerebrospinal fluid and blood before and after receiving treatment with a chemical called DMF, which is a treatment used for MS, and it can dramatically alter an MS patient microbiome. They noted that the level of toxic bacterial metabolites correlated with neurodegeneration biomarkers in the patients. After treatment, the levels of the toxic metabolites decreased, further evidence that gut bacteria are involved in MS pathology. So we've got some pretty good studies in animals that correlate with behavioral problems, cognitive dysfunction problems, a lot of things where we look at the gut-brain axis, basically how what's going on in our gut can also affect what's going on in the brain. So this is just a great scientific study. Now, somebody sent me an email today and saying that they were concerned that their dog might have C. diff. Because the dog has a liquid diarrhea that she hasn't been able to get under control for the last couple of weeks, and she was going to take the dog in for testing, can't get in until Friday. So what I recommended was, well, why don't we see if you can at least drop off a stool sample prior to Friday, because they could get some testing done before you're actually there for the appointment, and you could actually have some results back rather than waiting another 5 days to get results. So a couple of things that I was looking at when I was doing a little research on this gut-brain association is that when we are concerned about bacterial overgrowth of bad populations like Clostridium or E. coli or Salmonella in the bowel, you don't want to go in and just ask for a culture and sensitivity. I read a great article that looked at dogs. They sent samples from healthy dogs and dogs with chronic diarrhea to 3 different veterinary labs, and they didn't tell the labs which dogs had diarrhea and which dogs had healthy stool. And interestingly, they grew more nasty bacteria and declared the dogs sick who had healthy stools than the dogs with the diarrhea stools. And the reason for that is that most of the bacteria that are bad in the gut are what we call anaerobes. They grow without the presence of oxygen. And the tests, the culture and sensitivity tests done on stool samples by the labs, don't test for those guys. They test using aerobic cultures, which means they're exposed to air and oxygen. So they actually miss most of the pathogenic bacteria that are there if you just ask for a culture and sensitivity, and you may end up actually treating the wrong thing. You may treat a healthy gut that you don't want to use antibiotics in. You may use the wrong antibiotics to take care of the bad guys that may be overgrowing, and maybe they're not even overgrowing. So the better test that you want to ask for if you have a dog with chronic bacteria or chronic diarrhea problems and you want to rule out bacterial infection, you can do a couple of things. One, You can do something like the Animal Biome, which is looking at the DNA of the bacteria in the stool, so we're actually classifying them by their genome. The second test you could ask for is something called a fecal PCR, which is a polymerase chain reaction test. But that is basically looking at the genetic code that's there and not looking at a culture. So really important to know which test is the one to run, which test to ask for. So don't ask for a stool culture. You're not going to get results that are really going to be meaningful. Remember that study where they tested normal dogs and diarrhea dogs, didn't tell the labs, and got totally erroneous results back. So if you want to find out if there are bad bacteria in the gut or that there's a dysbiosis in the gut, you've got to do something like the Animal Biome or a PCR, a fecal PCR. We used to do a lot of fecal PCRs, and we would find dogs and cats who had bad bacterial overgrowth by bad bacteria that we did need to treat. So very, very important that you know that you're treating the right thing. And really interesting that when we do have this gut dysbiosis, we know that it affects the immune system. We know that it is a dysbiosis in the bowel is highly associated with chronic allergies, chronic inflammation. It's been shown to have effects on arthritis, joints, so many things in the body. So it's really, really important that we have that healthy gut. And we know that prebiotics, probiotics, not using antibiotics unless we are desperate, really, really, really important. So just interesting stuff when you start, I'm not really a research person, but every once in a while it's kind of fun to look up some interesting studies and make correlations between what we're seeing in the animals and what we're seeing in people. We know that DM in dogs, degenerative myelopathy, does have a genetic factor, but I think it would be really interesting to also look at the gut microbiome on dogs who become symptomatic versus those who do not become symptomatic, and see whether having a healthier gut microbiome might help those dogs stay mobile longer. And certainly we need more of these studies for our seniors with cognitive dysfunction and a lot of the other problems that we're seeing. Okay, we got to go out in the cold and feed some donkeys and horses and hinnies and minis and freeze our butts off. Interestingly, this morning we wore our Australian Outback long raincoats. The donkeys were scared to death of us. They'd never seen us in those big coats, and they wouldn't come near us. They flew out of their stalls. We had to take our coats off and work in our shirt sleeves this morning when it was freezing because they wouldn't let us near them. They wouldn't come eat. Amazing how something like a coat can make a difference. Have a great evening, everyone.